Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the Roman author Eutropius. So if you're not familiar with Eutropius, he's a historian, right? Writing in the later part, of the Roman Empire, and he's writing what he calls Breviarium aber Condita, right? Which is sort of this brief history, right? The Historia Romani. This brief history of Rome, which is great because the style that he writes it in, his prose is pretty straightforward, which makes it very useful for a high school level, or anyone learning out Latin and just has a couple years under their belt. So I like to use it in my classes as the first kind of entry into Roman history, right, or historians, because it is at a level that's a little bit easier to understand. And his topic, particularly in this one, the Second Punic War and Hannibal, it's such a great topic with so much history woven in. So many great characters, blood oaths, battles, politics, the economy changing, all these great things that lead to really interesting, passive conversation in my class about Roman culture, Carthaginian culture, who was Hannibal. If you want to learn more about it, I highly recommend that you go and look up Eutropius. I can't do it in this video, but there's a ton of great resources out there. A lot of people have made YouTube videos about the Second Punic War. History Channel made a great documentary called Barbarians Rising, which talks about Hannibal from a slightly different perspective. I'd recommend that you go out and find any of these resources, look up Eutropius, and just dive in, right? Take some time to learn his background and then start diving into the story. The thing I'd encourage you to think about as you read Eutropius is his bias, right? He seems to always have this pro-bias of no matter what happens to the Romans, they'll overcome any obstacle, which makes sense at the time he's writing. Particularly the Western Roman Empire is collapsing. Rome has overcome or endured a lot of hardships. And so it does have that bias to it. And you want to think about, whenever we study history, what is history all about? What does history mean? It's a judgment call, and Eutropius is no different. So when you read about the Second Punic War, his version of Hannibal in the Second Punic War, because he's writing the brief history, he's going to leave a lot of interesting details out. And the question I always ask my students is, why did he leave these out? Why did he choose the words that he did or talk about the topics he did? It just leads to really great conversation. But in terms of this video, the translation, like I said, the Latin is actually pretty straightforward. So it's not anything that you won't be able to handle. I usually give it to, for a frame of reference, my Latin 3 students, and they would have had about 4 years of Latin under the belt between middle school and coming to the high school. 3, I guess it would be in their 4th year. So somewhere in that range usually is able to handle this. So for this video, just to do something different, a lot of people have asked me why I don't do an interlinear translation, right? Putting the English with the Latin. I tend to avoid it because I talk more in class. But for this, I thought since it is a authentic Latin or a Roman author, that I would try the interlinear translation route. This way you can see a couple of different things going on. So I'm still highlighting the cases for you and color coding it, which is something I always do for my students. Above, up top, I've put some sort of grammar notes, right? If there's a particular piece of grammar that I think you might need your memory refreshed on or something I just want to help you with, you'll see it above the Latin line. And below the Latin line, you'll see the English translation. So I didn't put the pure translation. I tried to put it out of order. So in other words, I tried to translate each word or phrase underneath so you can kind of see what the words mean and then put it all together yourself. Okay? So chapter 7 of book 3, rather, is where Eutropius starts talking about Hannibal, the rise of Hannibal, and the start of the Second Punic War. So we start with this phrase. We have eodem anno bellum punicum secundum Romanis in latum est per Hannibalem Carthaginiensium ducem ... And the line continues. We'll do that in the next slide, right? But it starts with this ablative of time when, in the same year, right? And he's been talking about this particular year previously in his work. So in the same year, the Second Punic War, the bellum secundum punicum, right? The Second Punic War. And then you have in latum est. It's perfect tense, passive voice. It was waged on the Romans. This is this dative of a compound verb in latum, right? Inferre is a compound verb. It usually takes the dative. You can translate it was waged on the Romans by Hannibal, per Hannibalem, right? So already he's kind of giving away this bias of, we, the Romans, we didn't want this war. It was waged on us, right? So you can already start to see his bias of how he's framing this discussion, right? So he says it was waged by Hannibal. And he describes Hannibal as the ducem, right? There's your accusative because it's describing Hannibalem, right? Accusative. The leader, or the general, you might say, of the Carthaginians, right? This Carthaginian general. Then he continues, and it's the Carthaginian general, qui saguntum Hispaniae civitatem Romanis amicam oppugnare agressus est, anum agens, vicesimum aetatis copiis congregatis, and then you have CL, a number, milio. Okay, so a big phrase to start talking about Hannibal. So it says Hannibal, the leader, who, there's your relative pronoun, who, and to find the verb, you have to go all the way to the middle of the second line, agressus est, right? Who set out, you want to say. It's a deponent verb. I put a note there. So it's passive in form, but active in meaning. So it's Hannibal who set out, appugnare, there's your complementary infinitive, to besiege saguntum, right? Which is next to qui. So this whole phrase of Hispaniae to amicam is a description of Saguntum. So in other words, you might say it's Saguntum, a civitatem, a city or a city-state, Hispaniae, of Spain, right, of Hispania, right? So the city-state or city of Spain, and it's a city amicam, which in this context really means friendly to the Romans. So this is one of those special adjectives, amicam, that takes a dative, right, because you're friendly to someone is kind of the idea. So it was an ally of the Romans, or you'd literally say friendly to the Romans. So Hannibal set out to besiege it. So as a quick pause, if you read about the Second Punic War, Saguntum, and the confusion over who controlled Saguntum, its alliance with Rome, this is what sets off the Second Punic War. Read the background. It's really fascinating. Eutropius is leaving out a lot of details and also kind of fudging a little bit the history here. Okay? So it's Hannibal. He set out, or who set out to besiege Saguntum. And then he's described as annum vicesimum. Right, this is an accusative duration of time. It literally means 20 years, aetatis, of age, right? It's sort of living, agens means living. So you might say living for 20 years of age is kind of one way to translate it. Agens is just a present participle. It's describing Hannibal. That's why it's nominative, right? Living for 20 years of age, okay? So basically he's 20 years old is what he's getting at. Then you have this ablative absolute, copiis congregatis. So copia can mean supplies, right? When you have it in the plural, it usually means troops or forces. So it's the ablative absolute. You can say with X having been Y, right? So it's with the troops having been assembled, congregatus, right? So with forces or troops assembled or having been assembled, you have this genitive of measure with milium, it means 1,000, of 150,000, right? So another way to translate this is he came to Saguntum having assembled, or with forces having been assembled, of 150,000. So he has a massive army is the idea. And again, the numbers are a little off here with Eutropius, but the truth is, or the history is that Hannibal does show up at Saguntum, right? The Carthaginians. Then you continue on. You have hic Romani per legatus denuntia verant ut bello abstinere. So hic is just dative to whom, right? The Romani, the Romans, denuntia verant, they warned, right, or denounced or warned through legatos, per legatos, through envoys. It means they sent envoys to Hannibal saying, stop this, right? They warned him. And they warned him so that you have this indirect command, because it's the idea of warning, right? So they warned him that he might abstain or hold back, you might say, bello, from war. You have this ablative of separation. So the idea is separate yourself from war, right? Hold back, abstinere, go away from war. It's subjunctive, imperfect subjunctive, because you have an indirect command. So the idea is they warned him through envoys so that he might, turn back, you might say, or hold back from war, saying, if you do this, we're going to have a war, is the idea. Then you have is legatos admittere noluit. So is is he, meaning Hannibal. He, noluit, did not want admittere, to admit. It's just a complementary infinitive. Legatos, the envoys. So he didn't want to receive or take in the envoys. He didn't want to hear it. Okay, so he turns them away. Then you have Romani. Etiam Carthaginem miserunt ut mandaretur Hannibali ne bellum contra socios populi Romani gereret. So the Romans, all up at the top, Romani, the Romans also, miserunt, sent, right, perfect tense. Carthaginem, because it's the name of a city, you have no preposition here. It's the accusative of place where. So they sent envoys, is the idea, to Carthage, right? So you have to imply the word envoy. So they also sent people to Carthage. So that, here we have ut mandaretur, it's a purpose clause, for the purpose of right? So that it might be ordered, you could say, or so that he would, it's ordered to Hannibal, or Hannibal was ordered. Then you have the reason of why they're ordering it. Ne bellum contra. It's a negative indirect command. So saying that might be ordered to Hannibal, right, to stop, so that war, right, contra socios, against the allies of the Roman people, Populi Romani, not be waged, gerere, right? So that he may not wage war against the people of Rome, right? They're saying, stop this now, right? And they sent envoys to Carthage too, saying, you got to stop so that, Hannibal doesn't wage war against allies of Rome. That was the whole idea. The people of Saguntum considered themselves and were allies of Rome. The Carthaginians didn't like that because of the treaty of, the Ebro River and the First Punic War. Again, read the history, you'll understand what's going on here. But they're telling him, stop this, right? Stop now. Then you have the last part of this section, this chapter. You have dura responsa a Carthaginiensibus data sunt. So dura responsa are harsh responses, right? Harsh responses data sunt. They were given. It's just perfect tense passive voice. They were given by the Carthaginians, a Carthaginiensibus, right? You have a passive verb. You're probably going to have the ablative of agent. Okay. Then you have Saguntini interea fame victi sunt, captique ab Hannibale ultimis poenis adficiuntur. So the Saguntini, right? There's your nominative. The Saguntines, meanwhile, they victi sunt, perfect tense, passive voice. They were conquered by famine, by hunger, right? Means because they're being besieged by Hannibal. So they're overcome by hunger. And then we have this perfect passive participle, having been captured by Hannibal, ab Hannibale. So having been captured by him, they surrender is the idea. They adficiuntur, they are afflicted, right? By we want to say by means of, maybe the ultimis poenis is the ablative of means. They were afflicted by or by means of the ultimate penalty. It's a euphemism of saying they were killed, right? What's the ultimate penalty? He kills all of them, right? That's the idea. So the people of Saguntum were killed by Hannibal. This is the big reason or justification Eutropius is giving of what starts the Second Punic War, which is true. But again, I'd encourage you to read the actual history from other sources to see what the real story is here. Eutropius is definitely simplifying it to make his point, or to put a little bias that Hannibal started the war. Like, look how horrible he is. That's the idea. Then you have the last line is bellum Carthaginiensibus indictum est. Right, so war, bellum, indictum est. It was declared, perfect tense, passive voice. Right, it was declared on the Carthaginians. Here's your dative of the compound verb, right? Indictum is a compound verb. It goes with a dative case noun. So who is it inflicted on, or not inflicted, rather declared on? It was declared on the Carthaginians. So the idea here, Eutropius is saying, is we didn't start the war. Once Hannibal attacked Saguntum, then we came in and declared war on Carthage. Okay, so that's the first chapter in the Hannibal story, right? Again, book 3, chapter 7. The Latin is not too crazy. You need there's some things, there's a lot of subjunctive in that last slide. Purpose clauses, negative purpose clause, or negative commands, I think were in there. You got to just refresh your memory on that, but hopefully you're in a place where you can kind of see it. And if you're not, take the grammar notes I gave and go look up. You could use something like Latin Tutorial or any of the great YouTube channels out there to look up what these grammar structures are, and then you'll be able to translate this a lot easier. But again, you want to read this aloud if you can. If you have a friend who can read it back, have them read it back to you, because like I always say, you don't want to shut off the listening and speaking part of your Latin. It'll help you to really understand what's going on here. But just follow the pattern. Eutropius, his prose is very straightforward, right? He's not trying to trick you with what he's writing, but it's more the bias of what he includes in his brief history that makes it really interesting. So hopefully this made some sense to you. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help. Otherwise, keep at it and good luck.